man who spent 10 years studying procrastination spent an entire year reading 100 books to avoid writing a book about procrastination.
Wait, that is just devastating.
Welcome to Deep Into the Pages. The book we are unpacking today is Jon Acuff's 2026 release, Procrastination Proof, Never Get Stuck Again.
Yeah, and we are diving straight into what might be, honestly, the most relieving, counterintuitive premise about human productivity published in, the last decade.
Right, because Acuff just fundamentally rejects this whole cultural narrative that procrastination is a character flaw.
Exactly. He is saying it is not a laziness problem at all.
No, it's not.
It is actually a highly effective, deeply ingrained coping mechanism. And that is, that's the foundational shift in perspective you just have to make before we get into anything else in this deep dive into the source material.
Right.
When you are procrastinating, your brain is not malfunctioning.
It's working perfectly.
Yes, it is working perfectly. It is deploying a solution, right, to avoid a task that registers as difficult or scary or overwhelmingly vague. Your brain detects a threat. Usually the threat of failure, or sometimes, honestly, even just the threat of profound boredom. And so it seeks immediate emotional regulation. Procrastination is literally just the emotional regulation strategy that you've chosen in that moment.
I mean, that just reframes everything. So the mission for you, the listener, as we unpack this material today, is incredibly clear.
Right.
If you have ever felt like you are, sitting in the waiting room of your own life, like you feel like you are waiting for your real life to finally begin.
Oh, I know that feeling so well.
Right. This exploration is designed to help you cross that agonizing gap between just waiting around and actually becoming remarkable.
And we have a huge roadmap for today.
Yeah, we are going to completely deconstruct the underlying psychology of waiting.
And we are going to have a very necessary debate, I think, about whether the author's incredibly messy background actually qualifies him to write this stuff.
Oh, we definitely need to talk about that. We will also decode his specific 4-part framework for overrating your brain's threat responses. And then, we'll confront the specific psychological traps that are custom designed to keep you frozen.
So to really understand that psychology of waiting, we have to look at how we actually construct the parameters of our own lives. Because we don't just, passively wait.
No, we actively build the waiting room.
Exactly. There's a story Acuff tells early in the book that perfectly and frankly almost uncomfortably visualizes how we internalize these limitations.
Oh, you mean the Bose Corporation story?
Yes, that one.
Okay, let's get into this because this takes us back to the year 2002. Acuff is 26 years old at the time. He is working as a copywriter at Bose in Massachusetts.
Right.
And by his own admission, his track record up to this point in his life is just incredibly spotty.
To put it mildly.
Right. I mean, he's been fired. He's quit jobs out of sheer boredom. He's been laid off. He describes his 26-year-old self as essentially a sullen little storm cloud.
Which is such a vivid image.
It really is. He's deeply frustrated, and he's blaming his lack of progress on the corporate bureaucracy. He's essentially just waiting for someone else to recognize his genius and fix his career for him.
Which, if you think about it, is the classic posture of the procrastinator.
Oh, totally.
You just scan the horizon, deeply convinced that salvation is going to arrive externally, and that conveniently absolves you of having to take any frightening internal action.
Exactly. So he's sitting in this frustration, and one day his creative director pulls him aside after a meeting, and this director's name is Ted Bricelli.
Okay, Ted.
Acuff describes Ted as this giant of a man, lean, gruff, grizzled. He says if you picture Anthony Bourdain, but as a corporate creative director trying to manage a deeply frustrated 26-year-old copywriter, that's Ted.
I can picture him perfectly.
Right. So Ted takes out a napkin, slaps it on the table, and just asks him point blank, do you know why you're so unhappy right now?
And Acuff probably had a list ready.
Oh, he immediately launches into his standard grievances. He blames the management layers, he blames the approval process, he blames the red tape.
Naturally.
And Ted just raises this massive, tired hand, cuts him off, and says, you're unhappy because of the field and the stamp.
Which sounds like the start of a corporate lecture, honestly.
Right, but it becomes something entirely psychological. So Ted takes his pen, and he draws a massive rectangle that takes up almost the entire surface of the napkin.
Okay.
He taps it and says, this is Bose. This is an expansive soccer field for creatives like you to play in. Our mandate is to make magic carpets that transport people into the world of music.
Wow. I mean, that sounds vast. It sounds free.
It does, but then Ted explains the reality of the nesting doll effect.
Right. Yep.
He says that when the visionary founder hands this massive, wide-open field to the CEO, well, the CEO gets a little nervous.
Sure.
The CEO doesn't want to make a catastrophic mistake, so the CEO draws the borders just a little bit tighter to create a buffer. Ted draws a slightly smaller rectangle inside the big one.
So fear begins to shrink the geography of what is actually possible.
Exactly. Then the CEO passes that slightly smaller field down to the president, and the president also shrinks it out of fear.
Right.
Then the vice president takes it and shrinks it again. Then the department head, then the project manager, and finally down to Acuff's direct boss.
And with every layer, Ted is drawing smaller and smaller rectangles inside of each other on this napkin.
Yes. By the time the actual creative parameters reach Acuff, way at the bottom of the chain, Ted looks at him and says, "You don't have a soccer field."
Ouch.
And Ted stabs his pen right into a tiny microscopic dot in the very center of the napkin. And he says, "You are handed a postage stamp."
And if the story stopped there, it would just be this cynical validation of everything Acuff was already complaining about.
Yeah, it would just be a confirmation that the corporate world stifles creativity.
But Ted flips the mirror entirely. Ted tells him that the tragedy isn't the management structure. The real tragedy is that Acuff is actively choosing to stay on the stamp.
Wait, how is he choosing it?
Well, Acuff is blaming the bureaucracy, but the bureaucracy is actually providing him with an incredibly comfortable alibi.
Because the stamp is safe.
Yes, it is incredibly safe. If we analyze this through the lens of cognitive behavioral psychology, the stamp is basically the ultimate comfort zone.
Right.
If you only ever operate on a tiny microscopic postage stamp and you fail, well, you never have to take the blame.
You can just point to the tiny parameters and say, "Hey, I never had the room to run. The system was rigged."
Exactly. And Acuff frames this later through a concept he calls the acceptable success line, or the ASL.
Hey, ASL.
This is this invisible, highly arbitrary limit of success and risk that we feel comfortable with. It doesn't just come from nowhere.
Where does it come from?
We construct our ASL by cobbling together the beliefs of our parents, the average trajectory of our 5 closest friends, the socioeconomic expectations of the hometown we grew up in. We shrink our own field to match this invisible line, because stepping outside of it requires us to drop the coping mechanism.
Yeah.
If you step onto the open field, you are fully exposed.
Okay, I have to push back on Ted's metaphor for a second here.
Okay, pay for it.
Because I think a lot of listeners are going to feel a real tension here. Is the corporate world or society at large actually offering a massive, expansive soccer field?
That's a valid question.
Or is it, in reality, truly just a stamp? Let me offer a different analogy to challenge this. Think of a racehorse in a stall.
Okay.
A racehorse is bred to run. If you lock it in a stall and don't let it out, it doesn't just get happier sitting there in the dark. It gets frustrated. It starts kicking the wood. It gets destructive.
Right.
So are we procrastinating because we're inherently terrified of the open field, or are we just reacting incredibly rationally to environments like bad bosses, tight economies, rigid social structures that actively punish any kind of risk-taking?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. If the racehorse kicks the stall, is it procrastinating, or is it recognizing its actual constraints?
That is the exact tension of the human experience, isn't it?
It really is.
We so desperately want to blame the stall. And to be fair, the stall exists. Constraints are real. Bosses can absolutely be micromanagers. Budgets can be incredibly tight.
Definitely.
But Ted's profound point to Acuff was that while external boundaries exist, the internal boundaries we set out of fear are almost always tighter than the external ones.
Oh, that is a punch to the gut.
Yes, the corporate world has limits. But Acuff wasn't even testing those limits. He was just assuming them.
He assumed the stamp was his whole world.
Right. Procrastination essentially sets your starting point at 0. If you do anything at all, like if you take one step out of the stall or push on the boundary of the stamp, you have mathematically made infinite progress.
That's a good way to look at it.
Ted wasn't telling him the world is without limits. He was handing him permission to test the boundaries. Because when you push on them, you so often find they are made of paper, not concrete.
Which brings up a very real problem we have to confront about the author himself, actually.
The credibility issue.
Yes. Because we've established how we shrink our own potential out of fear and how we use procrastination to stay safe. But we absolutely must look at the messenger here.
We really must.
If the author himself spent over a decade shrinking his own field and basically living in that stall, can we trust his methodology?
It is a genuine debate. It is unavoidable when you read this text because Acuff is just so completely transparent about his own failures.
Honestly, transparent is an understatement. I mean, let's just look at the facts he lays out in his own introduction.
They are pretty rough.
Acuff's personal history heavily undermines his authority on the subject of productivity.
True.
He admits that he spent an entire year sitting in a black Toyota 4Runner in Nashville traffic, listening to Colin Hayes' song, Waiting for My Real Life to Begin.
Which is a beautiful song, but...
Over and over. Hundreds of times. That is a dirge. That is not the behavior of a high-functioning individual.
No, it's not.
And he even admits to needing to literally kidnap himself every single morning just to force his body to go into an office building.
The morning kidnapping, yes.
He writes that his first 15 years of professional work could be accurately summarized as unfocused, undisciplined, and unorganized.
He does write that.
So my question is, if it took this guy 13 years of agonizing testing and wrestling just to figure out the absolute basics of how to get a project done, why on earth are we taking his advice?
I get that.
Shouldn't we seek productivity frameworks from someone who is naturally disciplined? I mean, I wouldn't take financial advice from someone who declared bankruptcy 4 times. Why take productivity advice from a guy who admits to being terribly unproductive?
I completely understand the skepticism. It feels incredibly counterintuitive.
It really does.
But I would argue that this specific grueling vulnerability is precisely what creates his credibility.
How does that work?
Acuff addresses this head-on with a brilliant quote early in the text. He says, "This is a book by a monkey for monkeys."
Okay, that's funny.
He explicitly states that if you want a dry, 400-page theoretical text with 90 pages of academic footnotes written by a neuroscientist who has literally never missed a deadline in their entire life, those books exist.
Yeah, you can go buy those.
But those authors are monsters to the procrastinator.
Monsters.
They are. They are just tourists visiting the community that is stuck. Acuff isn't an academic operating in a sterile lab with a control group. He is someone who was forced to cure his own disease.
Okay, go on.
In 2013, he started his own company and suddenly lost the structural safety net of a boss. He was suddenly the CEO, the employee, the marketing department, and HR.
All at once.
He realized he was financially and professionally doomed if he didn't fix his habits immediately. He didn't build this system to write a book. He built it to survive. That sheer desperation makes the tools inherently practical.
I hear that, but let's follow the logic for a second.
Sure.
Does desperation actually scale to excellence?
What do you mean?
If you build a system just to keep yourself from drowning, is that the exact same system you use to build a remarkable life? Because remarkable is his benchmark. He uses that word.
He does.
If the goal is excellence, can a system built by someone who spent a decade failing at the basics actually get you there? Or is this really just a survival guide for the hopelessly distracted? It feels like we are just lowering the bar of productivity just so he can clear it.
You're assuming the system stayed in his living room, though.
Well, didn't it?
It didn't. What validates the methodology isn't just his personal survival story. It's the massive empirical testing that followed.
Okay.
He didn't just cure himself and immediately rush to the printing press. He spent the next 12 years testing these specific methods on over 500,000 people.
Oh, wow. 500,000.
Yes. He ran these frameworks through 400 different companies, from nimble little startups to massive rigid bureaucracies like FedEx and Walmart.
That is a lot of data.
He ran public sprints, he ran corporate challenges, he wrote 2 million words analyzing what worked and what completely failed. So the simplicity you're sensing isn't a result of him lowering the bar. The simplicity is a highly engineered feature.
A feature, not a bug.
Exactly. Acuff notes that life's default is preset to hard. Therefore, the system to fix our procrastination must be incredibly painfully easy.
That makes sense.
If a productivity system is difficult, complex, or overwhelming, a procrastinator will simply procrastinate on learning the system.
Oh, totally. I have done that. I buy the complex planner and then I never open it because it's too much work to set up.
Right. So the elegance of his framework hinges on removing friction entirely, starting with one simple radical concept, which is permission.
Okay, that is a fair point. If the cure for the disease requires the patient to run a marathon just to get the medicine, the patient just dies.
Right.
The accessibility of the cure matters. So let's look at this highly accessible cure, because after all that testing, he arrived at a 4-part framework called DPDR DREAM, Plan, Do, Review.
The DPDR.
And reading through this, I realized this is not a completely new concept if you work in software.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this is essentially agile methodology, or the concept of building a minimum viable product, an MVP, applied to human psychology.
That analogy actually maps perfectly onto what he is trying to achieve with human behavior here.
Because if you look at old school tech development, they use what was called a waterfall plan.
I've heard of that.
You would spend an entire year planning a massive software release. You tried to predict every single bug, every possible user interaction, and you basically built an inflexible 10-year roadmap.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. And what happens? It invites massive organizational procrastination. It's totally overwhelming. And by the time you finally launch this behemoth 3 years later, the market has completely changed and nobody wants it anymore.
Right. It's obsolete upon arrival.
Agile methodology came along and said, no, we don't plan for a decade, we sprint. We build a tiny functional piece, we test it in the real world, we review the data, and we iterate. DPDR is essentially an agile success loop for your personal ambitions. You stop planning the decade and you start sprinting the week.
Let's break down the mechanics of that loop because it is so practical, starting with the first phase, the D, which stands for dream.
Right.
This phase is entirely about answering one question: what do I want to do?
Sounds simple enough.
It does, but the psychological roadblock here is massive. Acuff insists that people are paralyzed because they lack permission to dream. We're terrified of picking the wrong dream.
Right. It's the classic fear of spending years climbing a ladder only to reach the top and realize it was leaning against the completely wrong wall.
Exactly.
So we just sit at the bottom of the ladder indefinitely, doing nothing.
Precisely. We want a guarantee of success before we expend the calories. But Acuff argues that in this framework, there is actually no wrong dream.
No.
There is only the next dream. Right. To explain the psychological shift required here, he uses this incredible example from a high school in Chicago that completely overhauled its grading system.
Okay, what did they do?
Historically, if a student failed to meet the criteria for a class, they received an F.
Sure, standard.
Right. But psychologically, an F is a terminal identity. You look at the paper and you think, I am a failure. I am inherently flawed.
It's the end of the road.
But this school replaced the F with a grade of not yet.
Wow. Not yet. The semantic shift there is enormous.
It completely changes the entire neural pathway of how a teenager processes setbacks.
I bet.
If you receive a not yet, you understand you are simply on a learning curve. You haven't reached the destination, but the journey hasn't been canceled.
You're just not there yet.
Exactly. And Acuff applies this directly to our goals. If you pick a dream, say starting a podcast, writing a novel, or changing careers, and it doesn't work out the way you envisioned, it is not a failure.
It is just a not yet.
It is just a not yet. You gathered data, you learned what doesn't work. It is fuel for the next iteration of the DPDR loop. The pressure to be perfect is entirely removed.
Which flows directly into the second phase, the P, which stands for plan.
Right.
So the core question shifts from what do I want to do to how will I do it?
The mechanics.
Exactly. And Acuff boils the entire philosophy of planning down to a deeply empathetic 5-word mantra: make tomorrow easy today.
I love that phrase.
It's so good. And to explain why this works, he introduces the dynamic of night me versus morning me.
Okay, this might be the most universally relatable psychological concept in the entire book.
It really is, because it gets right to the heart of decision fatigue.
Let's talk about it.
Think about night me, the version of you that exists at like 9 p.m.
Okay, yeah.
Night me is ambitious. Night me is optimistic. Night me has the patience to plan the outfit for tomorrow, to set up the coffee maker so it brews automatically, to map out the daily schedule, and to definitively decide on the exact 3 most important tasks to tackle.
Night me is a highly functioning adult.
Night me is an executive. But morning me.
Oh boy.
Morning me is a disaster. Morning me is a groggy, reactive creature operating purely on base instinct.
And there is a neurological reason for that, actually.
Really?
Yeah, when you wake up, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for executive function and complex decision-making, it is not fully online yet.
That explains so much.
So if morning me wakes up and has to make a dozen micro-decisions from scratch, like what do I wear? What's for breakfast? What project do I start first? They suffer from what Acuff calls chronic cognitive overload.
Right.
The battery drains before you even start the real work. Morning me will successfully talk you out of going for a run simply because the act of locating your left running shoe requires too much cognitive processing power.
Oh, I have absolutely been there. I will give up on a workout because I can't find a clean pair of socks.
We all have.
So the goal is to completely bypass morning me's decision-making ability. You are essentially acting as an incredibly kind assistant to your future self. If morning me doesn't have to think, morning me can just execute the script that was already written by night me.
Yeah.
And there's a golden rule within this planning phase that anchors the whole thing. Plan in pencil, live in pen.
Yeah.
You execute today with absolute conviction, so you live in pen, but you leave the long-term flexible, you plan in pencil, because you cannot plan a decade.
So true.
Acuff makes a great point. He says nobody who bought a meticulously detailed 10-year planner in 2019 had global pandemic and worldwide toilet paper shortage penciled in for the spring of 2020.
Right. You can't predict that.
You plan the immediate sprint with certainty, but the long-term horizon must remain adaptable.
Which brings us to the heaviest lift of the framework, the second D, which is do.
The doing.
This answers the simple question, am I doing it? And according to Acuff, this phase should consume roughly 70% of your time and energy within the loop.
Most of it.
Yeah. This is what creatives call the messy middle. This is the execution phase, the montage.
Oh, the montage. And this is where we run headfirst into a massive cultural delusion about what work actually feels like.
Yes. The deeply uncomfortable truth that excellence is incredibly boring.
It really is.
We have been conditioned by cinema to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of effort. We all love a movie training montage.
Who doesn't?
We watch Rocky Balboa punch frozen meat in a locker room, chase a chicken, and run up the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art to an incredible Bill Conti soundtrack.
It's iconic.
We take 3 minutes of screen time, and we feel a surge of vicarious adrenaline. We feel so hyped.
I usually want to do push-ups right after I watch it.
Exactly. But Acuff calculates the reality of that training. In the context of the story, Rocky actually trained for roughly 80,640 minutes.
Wait, 80,000?
Yes, and the audience only saw 8 of those minutes.
Wow. They skipped the 80,000 minutes of profound, repetitive boredom.
Exactly. Cinema cuts out the monotony entirely. But when we step into the dopa phase of our own lives, when we sit down to write the code or make the sales calls or study for the bar exam, we get deeply discouraged.
Because there's no soundtrack.
Right, because our brain expects the dopamine of a 3-minute montage. But reality delivers the slow, grinding serotonin of an 80,000-minute slog.
That is a harsh reality check.
The brain registers that lack of dopamine as a signal that something is fundamentally wrong. It thinks, I'm bored, therefore I must be doing the wrong thing.
I see.
And that is exactly when procrastination swoops in to save you from the boredom.
And if you somehow manage to survive the 80,000 minutes of boredom, you reach the final phase of the loop, the R, review.
Right.
Which answers, did it work? Mathematically, this is the shortest phase. It should only take about 5% of your time.
Only 5%.
But ironically, it is the phase where the vast majority of people completely drop the ball and sabotage their own growth.
Because reviewing your work forces you to confront reality. And reality is vulnerable. It is. Acuff issues a really harsh warning here about becoming a successful year.
A successful year.
Yeah. A successful year is someone who consumes endless productivity podcasts, reads 100 books about building habits, watches documentaries about visionary founders, and endlessly observes other people building remarkable lives.
So they are doing a lot of consuming.
Right, but they never actually pause to review the raw data of their own life to make structural changes. They are incredibly busy consuming, but they are entirely stagnant.
That hits a little close to home.
Yeah.
So to survive the review phase, you have to embrace what he calls the 5% imperfection rule.
Okay, what's that?
If you demand perfection, you will literally never finish. Acuff argues that you constantly have to choose between 5% imperfection coupled with 95% completion versus 100% perfection that results in 0% completion.
You have to ship the product.
You have to. You must accept minor manageable flaws in order to actually cross the finish line and get the data. And when you finally sit down and look at that data, there is one ultimate question you must ask yourself. What did I add?
Oh, that question. That question is the absolute key to objective self-analysis.
How so?
Well, when you review a failure or a stalled project, did you simply look at the raw data, or did you add a heavy layer of emotional narrative to it?
Oh, I see.
Did you add false expectations? Did you add a sweeping judgment about your fundamental self-worth just because a client said no?
We all do that.
The data might say, I sent 10 emails and got 0 replies.
Right.
That is neutral data. But the procrastinator's brain adds to it. It says, therefore, my product is terrible, people hate me, and I should probably just quit the industry.
We catastrophize.
Exactly. Stripping away what we add allows us to review the facts coldly, objectively, and then iterate for the next cycle of the dream phase.
Okay, the loop makes logical sense. Dream, plan, do, review.
It's very clean.
But I have to stop us here, because we need to drill back down into that do phase for a second.
Okay.
Surviving that boring 80,000-minute montage is really the crux of the whole issue. It is incredibly difficult.
It is the hardest part.
So how do you actually survive when the initial burst of motivation completely evaporates on, like, day 4 of a project?
Well, Acuff introduces this concept he calls the motivation portfolio.
Right, and I'm going to be completely honest here. I take a very sharp, highly analytical stance against this entire section of the book.
Really? You're not buying the portfolio?
I am highly skeptical of it because the premise he lays out is that motivation does not magically replenish as a project gets harder. In fact, it usually vanishes completely.
Which is true.
Sure, you cannot rely on feeling inspired. So he argues that you must proactively curate highly specific, deeply idiosyncratic, and honestly sometimes utterly ridiculous tricks to force your body into action.
Tricks. Okay.
He gives the example of a woman named Brittany Nelson who uses the blow pop trick.
Right, the candy.
She literally unwraps and sucks on a watermelon blow pop to get herself through 10 minutes of dreaded administrative emails.
Yeah.
Or Acuff himself, who admits to loudly shouting encouragement to himself out loud while running up a steep hill, fully aware that his neighbors can hear him.
You find it gimmicky.
I mean, it sounds incredibly infantile. Are we honestly suggesting that the path to a remarkable, high-achieving life involves treating ourselves like easily distracted toddlers who need a piece of candy to do their chores?
Wow.
Shouldn't high-functioning adults just, I don't know, cultivate the grit and discipline necessary to get their jobs done regardless of how they feel?
Okay, I am going to passionately defend the motivation portfolio against that critique.
Defend away.
Because I think it actually acknowledges the biological reality of how our brains actually function.
Okay.
You are arguing for discipline. But discipline is a finite, highly exhaustible resource. Neuroscience shows us this over and over.
Right. Decision fatigue.
Exactly. You wake up with a certain amount of willpower. Every time you make a decision, suppress an urge, or focus on a tedious task, you deplete that reserve. By 4 p.m., after making hundreds of micro-decisions, the discipline tank is just completely empty.
That's fair.
You cannot simply white-knuckle your way through a decade of work.
So what is the alternative to discipline then?
Fails.
Ails.
Motivation is an ongoing sales process. Acuff's core philosophy here is that you are fundamentally, every single day, selling your future self to your present self.
Oh, that's interesting.
Present pace wants comfort right now. Future you wants the rewards of hard work. You have to bridge that gap. And frankly, yes, when faced with chronic cognitive overload, sheer boredom, and the amygdala's threat response to complex tasks, the human brain absolutely does revert to toddler-like resistance.
So treating yourself like a toddler is justified.
It is justified because it is highly effective behavioral engineering. Let's look at the blow pop trick again.
Okay.
It's not about a sugar rush. It is a physical commitment device that alters the brain's perception of time. When you look at an overflowing inbox, your amygdala screams, "This will take hours." It's endless. The friction to start is massive. But a blow pop takes exactly 10 minutes to dissolve.
10 minutes.
By connecting the task to the physical object, Brittany shrinks the perceived duration of the dreaded task down to a non-threatening 10 minutes. The brain says, well, I can endure anything for 10 minutes.
Wow.
She bypasses the threat response, breaks the friction of starting, and usually once the momentum is built, she can just keep going for an hour. The candy is just the ignition switch.
I see the mechanics of it, I do. But does an ignition switch scale to serious professional success, like big numbers?
Oh, it absolutely does. Look at the story of Matt, the real estate agent featured in the book.
Oh, great, Matt.
Matt was facing a professional cliff. He needed to make 157 cold calls to potential leads. And cold calling is universally despised.
What's the worst?
It is boring, it invites constant rejection, and it is overwhelmingly tedious. Matt wanted to do literally anything else. He was deep in the urge to procrastinate.
Right. His brain was probably telling him to reorganize his desk or check the news.
Exactly. But Matt utilized his motivation portfolio. He decided to throw the kitchen sink at his own resistance. He didn't rely on discipline. He relied on strategy.
What did he do?
He sold himself on a deeply simple 3-word permission phrase. Phone calls work.
Phone calls work.
He meticulously curated his physical environment to remove all distractions. He shrank the timeline, committing to just a few calls at a time to bypass the overwhelm. He used every single psychological trick in his portfolio to force himself to just pick up the phone.
And did it work?
Because he successfully engineered his behavior to make those 157 calls, he secured $5.9 million in real estate sales.
Wow. 5.9 million.
Let's just do the math on that for a second.
Dollars.
That means each individual grueling cold call was worth over $37,000 to his business.
That is insane.
Right. If a seemingly silly gimmick successfully overrides the brain's biological desire to stop, and it yields a $5.9 million return on investment, it is emphatically not a toddler trick.
It's just smart.
It's as high-level, practical neuroscience. You do whatever it takes to cross the threshold of action.
Okay. You win that one.
Thank you.
That is a deeply compelling defense. If the gimmick successfully clears the roadblock is cleared. The ROI completely justifies the method.
Exactly.
But this leads us perfectly into our final major section of this deep dive into the source material.
The traps.
Let's say a listener fully understands the DPDR loop. They are ready to embrace agile sprints instead of decade-long plans. They have curated their motivation portfolio, and they have a desk drawer full of blow pops ready to deploy against their inbox.
They are ready to go.
Why do people, armed with all this knowledge, still fail?
That is the big question.
Acuff argues that it is because we all fall into default personality traps that systematically short-circuit the loop.
The 4 traps on the road to remarkable, they're essentially behavioral blind spots.
Yeah, and when I read this section, the analogy that immediately came to mind was selecting a character class in a massive role-playing game, like an RPG.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Whether you choose to play as a mage, a warrior, or a rogue, every single class comes with fantastic baseline stats. But they also come with a hard-coded fatal debuff, a vulnerability baked right into the software.
Right, like a weakness.
Exactly. If you play a heavy warrior, you are slow to dodge magic. You have to know your inherent debuff to survive the game. So let's walk through these 4 psychological traps and identify the debuffs.
Okay, the first profile is the dreamer's trap.
The dreamer.
This individual gets completely blissfully stuck in the very first phase, the dream phase. They are the endless brainstormers. They possess 1,000 incredible ideas, but they execute absolute 0 of them.
They just love the idea.
Right. They get a massive dopamine hit from the conception of an idea, which tricks their brain into feeling like they've actually accomplished something real.
Oh, that's dangerous.
It is. Acuff gives the really painful example of the person who, 1 week before a major stressful product launch, walks into the war room and says, you know what would be cool? What if we pivoted the entire strategy?
Oh, no.
They exhaust their team, they exhaust their spouse, and they exhaust themselves because they categorically refuse to exit the safety of the dream phase and face the reality of execution.
Then you have the second profile, which is the perfectionist trap.
Oh, this one is common.
Very common. This person gets trapped in the plan phase. Their primary excuse is that they are always waiting to gather all the information before they make a move.
Which is impossible.
Acuff points out the sheer absurdity of this in the modern era. Thomas Jefferson might have literally owned all the books on a given subject in his private library 250 years ago. He could read them all.
Right.
But today, we generate exabytes of data daily. Gathering all the information is a mathematical impossibility. Therefore, perfectionism in the planning phase is not a virtue. It is actually a massive ego trip.
An ego trip. Unpack that for a second.
It's this grandiose subconscious belief that you are so special, you do not have to subject yourself to the normal, messy rules of human productivity.
Wow.
You believe you are exempt from trial and error. You believe you don't have to launch until conditions are absolutely flawlessly guaranteed to succeed. It's a defense mechanism disguised as high standards.
And the antidote for the perfectionist is to audition their dreams.
Audition them.
Yeah. Instead of committing to a massive year-long resolution, which instantly paralyzes a perfectionist because the stakes are just way too high, you audition the habit for 30 days.
You lower the stakes.
Exactly. You lower the stakes. You prove to your nervous system that you can execute on a small, imperfect scale before you demand flawless execution on a large scale.
Trap number 3 is the hustler's trap.
the hustler.
This is the person who gets entirely stuck in the do phase. This is the toxic rise and grind mentality that dominates so much of corporate culture right now.
It's everywhere.
These individuals refuse to ever pause and enter the review phase because they view any moment of reflection or stillness as a delay. They are addicted to the cortisol of busyness.
So they just keep running.
Their mantra is, if I stop moving, I lose. So they run endlessly on a hamster wheel, completely confusing motion with actual progress. They might be working 80 hours a week, burning the midnight oil, but because they never check their compass, they are sprinting at full speed in the completely wrong direction.
Finally, we have the fourth profile, the analyst's trap.
The analysts.
This person gets bogged down in the review phase. They become what Acuff brilliantly terms an archivist for mistakes.
An archivist for mistakes. That sounds exhausting.
They use a heavy blanket of pessimism, which they carefully disguise as realism. They meticulously review all of their past failures, cataloging every single misstep.
And then what?
Then, they project that data forward, reviewing all the theoretical ways a new idea could potentially fail in the future.
So they review things that haven't even happened yet.
Exactly. By fixating on the negative data, they completely paralyze themselves from ever returning to the dream phase. They find immense safety in predicting failure, because if you predict it, you are never caught off guard.
Which brings this entire exploration directly to you, the person listening right now.
Yes, it does.
Which of those four traps is your default setting? Are you the dreamer, the perfectionist, the hustler, or the analyst? Recognizing your inherent RPG debuff is the absolute only way to stop it from silently hijacking your DPDR loop.
We made a promise to the listener at the beginning of this show that we would share some personal takeaways from this text.
We did.
Those uncomfortable, I realized moments that prove this material actually gets under your skin.
Yeah, and reading through those four traps hit me incredibly hard. It was a mirror I didn't necessarily want to look into.
What did you see?
I realized that I am the classic textbook hustler. I'm so deeply obsessed with the do phase, with the tactile sensation of physically crossing things off a list, that I view the review phase as a complete waste of daylight. Oh yeah, I get a neurochemical dopamine hit from motion, not from strategy, which perfectly and painfully explains why I can sometimes spend 3 solid weeks working incredibly efficiently on completely the wrong project.
That is wild.
I am out there swinging an axe, chopping down trees with incredible form, but I'm standing in the wrong forest. I use busyness to avoid the vulnerability of asking if the work actually matters.
It takes a lot to admit that.
What about you?
For me, my I realized moment was centered around the planning phase, specifically regarding how I manage my own capacity. I realized I use a concept Acuff calls stress stacking to actively self-sabotage.
Stress stacking, how does that work?
I will look at my perfectly reasonable schedule for a Tuesday, and a wave of anxiety will hit me. So I will tell myself I have to do my entire weekly to-do list right now.
Oh, wow.
I take complex tasks meant for Thursday and Friday and rigidly pile them onto today's agenda. It creates so much artificial overwhelm, such a massive spike in chronic cognitive overload that my prefrontal cortex essentially just trips the circuit breaker and powers down.
So what happens?
I end up totally paralyzed. I just shut my laptop, retreat to the couch, and watch Netflix for 3 hours. I actively manufacture a sheer volume of impossible tasks so that I have a socially acceptable excuse to do absolutely nothing.
It is the perfect psychological alibi.
It really is.
I'm simply too busy to even start, so I might as well rest. We are so incredibly clever at hiding our fear from ourselves.
We truly are.
So, as we wrap up this exploration and send you back into your day, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
A thought for the waiting room.
Exactly. Think all the way back to that napkin Ted Botticelli drew on at the Bose Corporation. Look at your own life. What is the invisible postage stamp you have quietly accepted?
What arbitrary boundaries have you drawn around your own potential, your own relationships, or your own career, just so you never have to risk failing on the wide open field?
We opened this hour with the story of a guy who read 100 books to avoid writing the one book he was actually meant to write. So the ultimate question is,
what's your 100 books? What are you so meticulously busy doing right now just to avoid the one thing you actually need to do?
That's it for this episode of Deep Into the Pages.